Done.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. And by that, I mean both of you. I appreciate the chance to tell you further our discussion about intellectual property today. And what I'm going to do in furtherance of that is to tell you the story of graphene. I think it's important, you being material science students, to actually get a little material science mixed in with your intellectual property. And the story of graphene is really a great story because it illustrates so many things that you need to consider when it comes to protecting your own intellectual property and respecting the intellectual property rights of others. Which is kind of a theme that we've been exploring throughout the whole lecture series. Anyhow, the question I want to ask today is a very basic one, especially one that is something that concerns you as students. It concerns Professor Eager as educators, and it is a great concern to institutions like the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which is kind of in the business, is in the knowledge business. And the question is whether or not the assertion of intellectual property rights, that is, protecting something with a patent or a copyright or a trademark, whether the assertion of those intellectual property rights inhibits or promotes the dissemination of scientific knowledge. And that is a great concern, as I say, to institutions that are involved in higher learning, as well as educators and students. And that brings us to my favorite material when it comes to material science, at least given the fact that I was born and am living in the 21st century, and that's this stuff here. Can anybody recognize this matrix? Any of you material science students recognize this matrix, which with my crude materials I've attempted to represent here in a hexagonal atomic structure. Anybody know what that is? Maybe it would help if you could see it too, right? Well, what this is a miraculous material, one that was only the figment of physicists' theoretical imaginations until about 15 years ago. And that is graphene. Does anybody know what graphene is? Graphene is one of those miraculous materials that Professor Eager tells you that you need to be circumspect about. But it really has an awful lot of amazing qualities that I think would interest you as material science students. First of all, does anybody know how graphene was, first of all, it was predicted by theoretical physicists, but for decades and decades and decades, these theoretical physicists, while they were able to predict its existence, were not able to extract it, to isolate it. It was something that was in the imaginations of theoretical physicists until two people came along, Geim and Novolesov. Geim being from the University of Manchester, and Novolesov being from the Institute of Microelectronics in Moscow. Anyhow, they came up with a brilliant method for isolating graphene. And to do that, you need to know what graphene is. Graphene is simply graphite. And where do you find graphite? In pencils. okay? Pencils are full of, or at least that's the way they used to make them. Pencils are full of graphite, and graphite is simply many, 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 many layers of graphene. And the way these folks, that is Geim and Novoselov, isolated graphene, anybody know how they did it? You material science students, you know, you must have some ideas of how would you isolate a one atom thick layer of graphene? How would you do that? And if all you had was a pencil, or let's say a block of graphite. Well, you do what they did. They took a piece of Scotch tape and they laid it on a block of graphite. They peeled it off. And I don't know if you can see that, but that, I don't know how many nanometers thick that is, but what they were able to do is to isolate a single atomic layer of graphene using Scotch tape and a block of graphite. And this is the product that physicists have been dreaming about for years, and until these guys came along, no one was able to figure out how to isolate it. The thing about graphene, and the reason why theoretical physicists were so excited about it, is because it really is an amazing material. Again, it's based upon this hexagonal matrix. It's in its pure form about 3/10 of a nanometer thick, which is about 1,000,000 times thinner than a human hair. But it's 150 times stronger than steel and 20% more flexible, at least in its pure form. It conducts electricity better than gold or copper. It sheds heat faster than almost anything, and is not only transparent, but it's impermeable. It's kind of like a dream material for material scientists. And so that's why theoretical physicists had been pursuing for so many years a process to isolate graphene. And finally, they came up with the Scotch tape and block of graphite method. And so this was such an important development that, oh, by the way, Geim and Novoselov received the Nobel Prize in physics in 2004 for this. But this was such an important discovery that there were tons of follow-on studies, not only research type studies, just pure academic research, but also lots of activity with respect to finding ways to and methods to exploit this material commercially. And so when this process was published by the inventors, educators and the editors of scientific journals, and everyone that was concerned with the dissemination of this sort of information in the world of material science became very concerned.
Yeah, they're working on the alarm system.
Because in addition to publishing their findings in Science magazine,
yeah, it's on test.
Geim and Novoselov went out and protected their invention by filing a patent on it. And so when they filed their patent, everyone became concerned about whether or not the filing of that patent would inhibit the follow-on research and the development of not only the knowledge base that theoretical physicists have been pursuing for so long, but also the commercial exploitation of this potentially valuable material. And so none of the publishers of magazines like Nature and Nature Science and Materials Magazine, they had trouble sleeping at night thinking that the assertion of intellectual property rights by these inventors would somehow inhibit the dissemination of information through their magazines. And by the way, they're in the magazine publishing business, which means they're in the magazine publishing money-making business. And if intellectual property protections was going to inhibit the publication of meaningful scientific research in their journals, that had very real implications for not only the world of science and knowledge, but also commercially. They saw this, that is the assertion of intellectual property rights, as a threat to the traditional system that peer-reviewed journals offer. You know, peer-reviewed journals are the way we essentially share information about all significant discoveries. It's a two-way platform. The researcher gets to publish and disseminate the information. That's one side of the platform. But the student or the researcher who reads it obtains knowledge and information for it that they then apply in their own ways. So scientific journals, peer-reviewed journals, and whether it has to do with medicine or material science, they are the lifeblood in many ways of the dissemination of scientific knowledge. Without papers published by students like you and educators like Professor Eager and institutions like the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, we would have no way of communicating scientific achievements, knowledge, development, ways of exploiting different inventions and discoveries. So really, scientific journals are the lifeblood of science itself. And if intellectual property rights were going to inhibit the publication of knowledge through those platforms, that was something that educators and publishers and students and everyone was very concerned about. So whenever educators are concerned about anything, what do? Of course, they do a study. They wanted to answer the question of whether or not the assertion of intellectual property rights inhibited the dissemination of information across these very important platforms, mainly speaking scientific journals. And who, of course, led the way in this research? Can anybody think of an institution that's near and dear to all of us that may have led the way in answering this question? Exactly right, the Sloan School at MIT. It was the Sloan School at MIT who in 2012 began to study whether or not the assertion of intellectual property rights inhibited the dissemination of scientific knowledge. And the study was conducted by its principal authors, Murray and Stein. And what they did is they decided that a way of determining whether or not they would be able to measure, because you know the Sloan School, it's all about empirical analysis and data. This is not a case-based school. This is a school that literally runs on empirical models and data analysis. And so doing what they do for a living, Murray and Stern decided to conduct a study, an empirical analysis of what are called patent paper pairs. Does anybody know what a patent paper pair is? Can anybody hazard a guess of what a patent paper pair is? Let's say you're an inventor and you have invented a process for exfoliation of graphene. What do you want to do with that? The two things you want to do with that is go hire a lawyer and file a patent so you can become a millionaire. But number two, being an academician, a researcher, and someone that is involved in basic research, you want to publish your data so that you can share it and also receive the admiration of your peers. And so what oftentimes inventors do is they not only seek intellectual property protection for their inventions through patents, but they also publish simultaneously papers describing their invention as a means of sharing the information with the scientific community at large. And these things are called patent paper pairs. So whenever a researcher creates an invention, comes up with an invention, and also writes a paper about it, and of course patents that invention, it's called a patent paper pair. And you can imagine that when it comes to the commercial exploitation of basic research, things that can be patented usually are. Pure research, oftentimes, which does not have any immediate commercial application, there's nothing to patent. So patent paper pairs usually involve theoretical or basic research which can be commercially exploited. If it can't be commercially exploited, then it's less likely that the research will be subject to a patent. But in the case of research which is commercially exploitable, oftentimes, in fact, the World Trade Organization researched this, and they found that 82% of researchers who patented their intellectual property also published a paper with it. So patent paper pairs are very common when it comes to basic research that has a commercial application of any kind. Now, in order to understand how this study was conducted, I need to teach you a simple thing involving citations and patents, because we're going to need to know how to do this when we file our patent application. So the way that you find prior art when it comes to a technology that you want to patent is you conduct what's called a citation analysis. And there are two kinds of citations. There are backward citations, and forward citations. And they pretty much mean just what they say. A backward citation is when any patent is cited by another patent. And a forward citation are patents that cite other patents. Let me give you an example. If you're filing a patent application for your novel way of exfoliating subatomic levels of graphene, the first thing you want to do when you file your patent application is look up methods for extracting or fabricating graphene. And so you go to the USPTO website, you'll find the code that relates to fabrication of graphene. You'll plug it into their website, and it will come up with all of the patents that involve the process for isolating graphene. And there are other search tools you can use. There are Google patents. There's a lot of software actually out on the market that kind of does all this for you. If you go to the USPTO website, it's a little cumbersome, and the more complex your invention is, for instance, if it's a new drug for the treatment of cholesterol, there can be an awful lot of related patents and categories that touch on your technology. And so researching it on the USPTO website can be a little cumbersome the more complex your invention is. And so there is software that is available on the market that does this whole thing for you, which lawyers, not lawyers like me, but lawyers who actually write claims and prepare patent applications use. There's a software called Dialogue Solution. I think I mentioned Google Patents. There's another one called Acclaim. One called BibMe. There's all kinds of software out there that you can use in order to find all of the backward citations, all of the citations where a particular technology has been referenced. Backward citations, another way of describing backward citations is prior art. So you've invented a new mousetrap. You want to determine whether this new mousetrap is patentable. You need to find out whether or not your technology creates a significant enough gap or improvement in the prior mousetrap technology. So what you do as an inventor is you use one of these services, or you go to the US Patent and Trademark Office website, you plug in mousetrap, and it will give you all the backward citations. In your patent application, you must recite all of the prior citations or prior art that's related to your device. Because the patent examiner wants to find out whether or not your device is patentable. And what they will do is they will compare it with the prior art. And if it creates a gap, if it shows an improvement, if it's a new application, if it's, quote, novel, then your patent application is going to be granted. But if it's just an obvious iteration of the prior art, which is revealed in the backward citations, chances are your application for a patent is going to be denied. So backward citations provide the information to the patent application examiner and the inventor to determine whether or not this invention, this particular piece of intellectual property, is patentable. All right, so that's an example of backward citations. An example of forward citations is self-evident and simple, just like the word implies. Once your patent is issued, so you have your patent for a better mousetrap, or for a method for exfoliating graphene, or for a new drug like Lipitor to treat heart disease. Once that patent is issued, then the patent office will list all of the patents that your invention touches on. And those are simply called forward citations. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is not because you need to know it when you're filing a patent application, but this is what the Murray and Stern from the Sloan School focused on when it came to determining whether or not the assertion of intellectual property rights acted as an inhibiting factor on the dissemination of knowledge. They looked at forward citations. Oh, and by the way, you can go on the USPTO website, or you can use Dialogue or Google or Acclaim or any of the other search engine software available. And not only can you get the backward citations of all of the prior patents, but you can also call up all of the prior literature. Everything that's ever been published in the scientific literature, in Science magazine, in Materials magazine, anything that has been published in that area is also listed by these services and by the USPTO office. So when Murray and Stern decided to study whether or not the creation of patents inhibited the spread of intellectual property, they looked at patent paper pairs and whether or not they found in the scientific literature forward citations to that particular research. And they did a wonderful Sloan School analysis of the data. Oh, by the way, there are lots of other reasons to do citation analysis. For instance, if you don't happen to be at the Sloan School and studying these abstract concepts, what value do you think having a handle on the rest of the patents for a particular device? Let's say you're an inventor, or let's say you're a banker or an investor who's been asked to invest in a project. What use would a citation analysis be to you?
Could determine like market saturation for a particular type of product.
Absolutely. And you find out not only that, you find out who your competitors are and what are they up to. You're trying to decide to invest your parents' life savings in something. You want to know whether or not this might be a good investment to make. And all of these search engines that I've mentioned, they all can produce through citation analysis literally a pie chart of an industry. So let's say your industry is microelectronics, okay? And you have an invention because you've come up with a superconducting material. You've come up with an invention that would be, you think, applicable in the world of microelectronics. So you type in either one of these search engines or at the USPTO website the invention that you or the invention field that you're doing your research and have an invention in, and you perform a backward citation and a forward citation analysis, and you can get a pie chart, literally a pie chart. It looks like this. This is actually one that I did before class today on microelectronics. And it'll show you, so this is AT&T, and this is Microsoft, and this is all others. So what a citation analysis will do for you or for your investors or for your fellow researchers or for your business partners or anyone who has an active or interest in your invention, especially the commercial exploitation of it, it'll tell you who your competitors are and whether who you're going to be competing against. It may tell you who you want to approach. For instance, with selling your technology. But this can be a very, very valuable piece of information when you're trying to determine how valuable your technology is. And oftentimes what will happen is companies will join small companies, not like AT&T or Microsoft, although they have had joint ventures before. But usually what happens is a company will join with other companies to form a patent pool, because you may be 1/2 of the citations and the potential market for it. But if you join with all of the rest, then you can have a patent pool that represents 75% of the market. And that's how small inventors are able to compete with outfits like Microsoft and AT&T and Comcast and the pharmaceutical giants, and name any industry, Boeing, General Electric. Oftentimes what inventors will do is they'll form pools of 2 or more inventors in order to market an invention. And what they do, oftentimes when you have an invention, like a fan blade and a GE engine, is that in order to practice that patent, you'll need to use other patentable technology. And so what you can do is you can form joint ventures with other parties that have patented similar technologies, which will enable you to practice your patent and then, of course, license it. And usually the deal is the companies that form these patent pools agree to cross license their patent technology and share equally in the licensing fees that are generated, or not so equally in the licensing fees that are generated, depending upon the circumstances. So the way that you compete with Microsoft and AT&T and all the big companies is by forming patent pools with other inventors. And as you can see, and this is a typical pie chart, quite frankly, you can see that these big companies will maybe occupy 25% of a market, but the vast majority of the market, the vast majority of the licensed technology, the protected intellectual property are owned by small companies and small groups of patent pools. So that's how the little guys get to compete against the big guys. Anyhow, the Sloan School did their analysis of forward citations, and they broke it down into two groups. They looked at inventions and papers, that is patent paper pairs, where the IP protection has already been applied for, that is where a patent is actually issued. And then they looked at patent paper pairs where there was no IP actually issued, just an application. And what they found by looking at it is a statistically significant negative reduction in forward citations. And so the people, Murray and Stern at MIT, decided that that was an indication that the smaller number of forward citations was an indication that the assertion of intellectual property rights acted to inhibit the dissemination of knowledge, because it reduced in future patents and in future literature the number of citations to the protected technology. They looked at a number of journals like Nature, and they found a 5.2% reduction or decline in annual forward citations for intellectual property where patents had been issued in addition to the research paper. They found a similar decline in Nature Biotechnology and some other magazines. And it led them to conclude that assertion of intellectual property rights inhibited the dissemination of scientific knowledge. And what I want to examine with you is whether or not they were right. So to do that, one of the things that we need to discuss is what incentives do you as students or as educators have to publish? Give me some examples. Why would you publish anything? How about in a peer-reviewed journal? Shane, why would you publish anything in a peer-reviewed journal?
Is it because to build the credibility?
Yes, that's a very nice way, I think, of saying to acquire the respect, the admiration of your peers. I mean, why does you know the maxim, publish or perish, right? So one of the reasons why academicians and students publish is because that promotes their careers. Another word is credibility. But to be published in a peer-reviewed journal is the way that we evaluate someone's credibility. Have you ever published a paper in a peer-reviewed journal? Do you remember what it was like? Sometimes, I know in papers that I've published, the list of people asking to be on the paper is sometimes longer than the paper. I mean, everybody wants to be on a paper, right? It doesn't matter whether you did 99.9% of the work. Anyone that you talked to or consulted or contributed in any way wants to be on that paper. And by the way, they should be on the paper, but what I'm talking about is why they're on the paper. And that's because it enhances their reputation among their peers. All right. Any other ways, any other reason why you would want to publish?
Yeah, I was thinking more like if people had complementary ideas, it would make you known to them. So like if you put yourself out there, then people would become aware of your products more than the reputation side of it.
That's another great. In fact, you're combining two, because a second way or a second reason for publishing is the dissemination of information and knowledge. But the third way is to make money. Okay, and if you're able to communicate with your peers about your ideas and your inventions, not only are you enhancing your reputation, not only are you sharing information, but you're creating potential means of exploiting your technology or your invention. And that's a very strong incentive for publishing. I know we talked a little bit about some of the other, some great inventors before and what they've done with their technology. Remember what we talked about, Tesla with their unique battery design held all the patents on that. And if they would wanted to hold on to that for 21 years and prevent Ford and General Motors and BMW and Mercedes-Benz from ever producing an electric car that might infringe on their patented technology, which they published and patented, they could have done that. They could have done that, but they didn't. And instead, what they did is they made that technology generally available. They literally donated the technology and placed it in the public domain. Toyota did the same thing when it came to their fuel cell design. I know he gets a lot of criticism these days, but Facebook's Zuckerberg, he has donated all of the research that Facebook has done on a particular type of artificial intelligence. Bill Gates has made publicly available the research resulting from their enormous investment in a malaria vaccine. Here at MIT, Kevin Esvelt at the Media Lab, who has done pioneering research on Lyme disease. And he's the author of something called the Nantucket Lyme Disease Study, which is close to coming to a cure for Lyme disease. Donated all of his research to the public, put it in the public domain. Why would they do that? Is that pure altruism, or is it something else?
I mean, in the case of Tesla, I think you have a certain amount of network effects that come along with electric vehicle proliferation, such as charging stations and etc.
Yeah, exactly. It ain't altruism. It's enlightened self-interest. Okay, especially in Tesla's and Toyota's case. You know, using a technology to control a market in some cases is a good idea. For instance, if you're Adidas and you've invested a lot in your three-stripe design, or if you're Nike and you use this swoosh to designate your product, it's important to erect barriers around that in order to control that design. You want to control that intellectual property because by controlling it, you control your company name and the goodwill that attaches to your company, which has tremendous value. But in other cases, controlling a market by controlling the intellectual property could be work at cross purposes to you. In Tesla's case, what they decided is, hey, if I let General Motors and Ford and Mercedes and BMW use this technology, then everybody's going to be making electric cars. And I have 5% of a market that's this size. Well, I would rather have 5% of a market that's this size. And so what they do is they conclude that disseminating the technology free of charge, as they say, rises like a tide, rises all boats. And 5% of a $100 million market is not as valuable as 5% of a $100 billion market. And that's what is behind Tesla's dissemination of their battery technology. Same with Toyota. How about Facebook? Is that, are they being altruistic when they turn over their software, their AI software that helps basically digest data? By the way, they turned it over to MIT and every research university in the world. Why would Mark Zuckerberg do that? Because when he gets you people researching, when he gets you people working on his technology and improving it, he's the direct beneficiary. And there isn't anybody that's in this world that is more into or dependent on the ability to crunch data than Mark Zuckerberg. So it's not altruism that has him do this, it's enlightened self-interest. Now, the Bill Gates Foundation and Dr. Esvelt at the Media Lab, I think that in those cases, that's pure altruism. That's just being good citizens. But in any case, releasing the technology creates a win-win situation. It's a win for society because the batteries get developed, new technologies that follow on get developed. Facebook comes up with innovations in artificial intelligence. We have cures for malaria. We have, obviously the RNA technology that's been used in the vaccine for the coronavirus was based upon predecessor technology. If it wasn't for that innovative technology, we wouldn't have a COVID vaccine now. Obviously, the Lyme disease study from the people at MIT is self-evident. A cure for malaria is good for everyone. So oftentimes when technology is released in this way, whether it be for altruistic reasons or enlightened self-interest, it represents a win-win situation for the inventor. It promotes innovation. It removes barriers to markets, which creates new products. Rather than control an existing market, it creates new ones. So the dissemination of scientific information, the sharing of patent technology really usually results in a win-win situation. So that brings us back to what I wanted to talk about originally, which is the story of graphene, because it tells us whether or not that MIT study that said that this statistically significant reduction in forward citations they predicted would cause innovation to be stifled in research areas like graphene. So let's look at what happened with graphene. After they patented their technology involving Scotch tape and a pencil, and controlled that market. If MIT was right, then the research and development of methods for exfoliating and isolating and manufacturing and producing graphene would have been inhibited. Unfortunately, the people at MIT didn't have Mr. Peabody's, Wayback Machine and couldn't travel forward in time and test any of the hypotheses or the conclusions that they came up with. But since their study was published in 2012, and it's now been 10 years later, we can look back on, for instance, the story of graphene and see whether the people at MIT were correct. They were correct that the forward citations to the work done by Geim and Novoselov were reduced in scientific literature. But did this actually translate into a reduction in the research and product development involving graphene? And the answer is it did not. In fact, what it did instead is, because of the commercial value and the potential riches that could be made with graphene, rather than use a pencil and a piece of Scotch tape, researchers came up with different ways of isolating graphene. There is a method called electromechanical exfoliation of graphene. There's an electrochemical method for exfoliating graphene, all of which have been patented. Did those developments create a barrier to the market? Certainly not, because now there are, if not dozens, maybe even hundreds of producers of graphene, each using the prior art to create new methods of isolating and manufacturing purer and purer and purer forms of graphene. And nowadays, you can find graphene as a result of this research in a lot of very, very exotic items, but everyday items just made of exotic materials. One of the things that creating a patent on the original process for exfoliating and isolating graphene, what it didn't do is it didn't inhibit the development of other processes for using graphene in the manufacture of materials that are well known to you. And in fact, I would recommend that you mention this to Don Baskin at his lecture on light weights, because graphene has been used extensively in the light weighting of materials. As I said, it's 150 times stronger than steel, 20% more flexible. It conducts electricity more efficiently than copper and gold, and reduces heat. If you're sending a probe to Mars, and it has a helicopter on it, and you're interested in blades for that helicopter that are made of the lightest and strongest possible material, what do you use? In 2004, you would have used carbon fiber. But now what you use is carbon fiber, which is impregnated with graphene. And it's lighter and stronger, and hopefully, if it flies, more efficient than what would be available back in the late 2000s. They were able to show that so many products have developed as a result of the value, the commercial value of this particular area of science, that all of the patents in the world could not stop the development. So what drives science, really, I think we can conclude, is not necessarily the dissemination of information. Certainly, intellectual property does not create barriers to follow-on research, so long as there is a commercial application that can be exploited. What drives science and what drives science right through intellectual property barriers is commercial exploitation. As a matter of fact, the research on graphene alone has led to the creation of new similar products. Stannine is one that is used in, which is a high temperature superconductor. Silicene is another one, which is a lot like graphene, but is used in microprocessors where you need tremendous conductivity. Germanium, which is based upon germanium, was isolated using some of the same processes that were used to isolate graphene from graphite. And again, it's another exotic material that has been developed based upon the technology that led to the development, the discovery and development of graphene. So in hindsight, using Mr. Peabody's Wayback Machine, the study by MIT that predicted that intellectual property right assertion would inhibit the spread of knowledge and science and stifle the development, commercial development of technology is, I would offer or suggest, completely false. And graphene is the best example I can come up with to show that that study was wrong. Any questions? Everybody's an expert in graphene now. Are you all going to go back and isolate a layer of graphene? You know, imagine that led to a Nobel Prize. Who would have thought? Any questions? If not, that's all I got for you today. Next week, we're going to start getting into the constituent elements of a patent application. We're going to talk about what you need in order to create a patent application. You know, what does the device that you want to patent, what characteristics does it have to have? How do you write claims? How do you write an abstract? Eventually, in about 2 weeks, you're going to be experts on how to file a patent. And this application, whether or not you need to file a patent application at any time in your life, the things that you need to know to file a patent application can be applied to all areas of intellectual property. So what we learn in filing a patent application has all kinds of cross applications in intellectual property. The idea being to protect your property as much as possible and commercially exploit it where feasible. Anyhow, that's what I got for today. If no questions, that's it.
I have more of an administrative question.
Please.
So is this a double session? So like,
This is a double session.
oh,
Or
okay,
well,
perfect.
I mean, the IP is 12 lectures, so it's a double module, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah. I just
I
want to
think it
know how
is,
many
yeah.
others I need to do.
There's gonna be 12. We'll go all the way into May. It might only be 11 for some reason, but anyway, it's essentially a double module.
I'll talk really fast, number 10, number 9, or number 10. Okay, so we'll put it all in. I'll just talk faster.
Just curious.
Yeah, but where are we now? We're at 5, right?
6.
6. Okay.
6, yeah.
Time
Okay.
flies when I'm having fun, anyhow. So,
Yeah.
so we're halfway through. We got 5 more to go. I need 5 more to turn you into intellectual property experts.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're half an expert right now.
Okay, guys. Thank you.
There are sayings about that. Anyway.
Cheers.
Thank you.